okay, that's the one I want.
No, I thank you for doing this because, as I said, the other one is just not worth the effort on it always fails.
It's all good. And like I said, you might propel me into finally showing up on video, putting those episodes
Excellent.
up that way too.
It's a sign.
I was like, okay, fine, I will step into that.
Thank you for that.
Okay, so this is the start. We're going to start here. The intro is being cut in.
This is it.
And then the first thing I'm going to ask you is, so I love talking about how you grew up, and I especially like to know about the teenage years. So you can start there earlier, but I just think teenage years are interesting.
Mm-hmm.
And that
Mm-hmm.
so much can happen there where we are starting to figure out, like, who am I? What am I going to be? And, you got to go to college, or you got to do this, or you got to do that. So, like, what was life like for you? And did you have any idea of who you were going to be in the world?
You're probably not going to like this answer, but I think I did.
That I
I
love
think
it.
I
I love it
did.
either
I feel
way.
like so, and I talk about this a bit in the book, but I grew up poor. There's no other way to put it. I grew up poor. Um, Never lacking love, never lacking family, not really lacking anything, but we just didn't have money. We didn't have a lot of money. And so, I would go to summer camps. And I remember at one point, this is a complete ramble, but I remember going to summer camp and all the equipment was rusted. And there was like this rusted tunnel that fell over, and I still have the scar on my inner thigh from it. So I was like, does everybody go to camps like this? Nonetheless, that was the last of my camp experience. But I'm the youngest. I have older brothers. So there was always a bit of growing up, sort of being a bit of a hanger on with them. My oldest brother's 9 years older. They didn't really want to hang out with their youngest sister or their only sister, but they had to because my mom wasn't going to have that game. She was like, yeah, you can go, but you have to take your sister who's 6, which of course is no fun. So there was a lot of that. And by the time, so interestingly enough, when I was growing up, we actually owned a video arcade. So I know, it's pretty
Wait
bad.
a
I
minute
don't,
though, because now I'm getting confused with video arcade.
I know. Sorry, that was
Arcade games.
yeah, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Video.
Mm-hmm. Penny
Was
candy.
video oh, because it's just video credit. It was
They're
because
called video
that's what they were
games.
called back. Right. My
Video
mind is
games. You're like, I'm so confused. Video game. So it was a video arcade. So an
got it.
arcade is
Yes.
maybe what the kids call it today. I love that. That's what tripped you up.
Because I'm
Um,
like video store and arcade at the same time. That's
no, it was an arcade. So we had a pool table, we had video games, we sold penny candy. It was the 80s.
wow.
It was the 80s.
Wait, and
Now
also, where did you grow up?
I grew up in New Jersey, in
Okay.
southern Jersey, central Jersey. Um, and the arcade was so spectacular. And in hindsight, I didn't realize how cool my mom was in the 80s because all of my brothers were older. So the entire arcade was painted bright yellow. She let my brothers, who were very at the time into Run DMC and breakdancing when it originally started, she let their friends come over and spray paint the entire inside. So they tagged up the entire inside of the arcade. And it was sort of the center of the neighborhood. So my mom became kind of everyone's mom or grandmom, even though at the time, weirdly, she was only in her 30s, late 30s or early 40s. But she really became sort of the neighborhood mama, where she would bribe the local kids for good grades. So we had Italian ice at the arcade. And so for every A, you got a scoop of Italian ice. So the goal really
Wow.
became getting the largest Italian ice possible. So, which is
Oh,
how
because
my
you get
mom,
one scoop per
one
A.
scoop
So if you
per,
come
yes.
in with
If you got
five
6 A,
A's,
oh
there's
yeah.
God. And it's not like, oh, you were doing them at a different time. Like, here you
Oh, no,
go. You're
no.
gonna get
You
all
get
at
one
what
really
amazing.
large, yeah, Italian ice. Yeah, one really long,
I
and she just
really
give you a
love
lot of
that
napkins.
too, because I feel like I struggled a lot with as a kid is is it okay to be smart to raise my hand?
Mm,
What does that mean about me? What are people gonna think about me?
yeah.
Like I had those thoughts and like she's like
Show it. Also, it was the neighborhood we grew up in. It wasn't expected that you were going to do really well in school. And my mom was not having that. She's like, oh, you can absolutely do well in school. And here, let's see if this works. And it absolutely worked
And not just
until
with
the
her
arcade
own
closed.
kids,
Oh no, she took
but
on everybody
everyone.
else's. Oh
Amazing.
yeah, yeah, yeah. She took on everybody, the neighborhood's kids. To this day, actually, she passed in 2020, and one of the now it was in the midst of the pandemic, and in the midst of the pandemic, we could only have 30 people at my mom's service. And one of those people was somebody who grew up with us at the arcade and hadn't seen my mom in 15 years and sent a message, or 20 years and sent a message and said, "Can I please come?" And he spoke about my mom and this era of time, like kind of how important that was. Because I don't know that she or any of us really understood the impact of who she was on this entire neighborhood of teenage boys, mostly at the time. So that's really about my mom.
I just got so emotional, like full chills and crying
Mm,
almost because, yeah, she likely knows she's making an impact, but it also feels like in today's world, I feel like there's so much this focus of like how, like, dream big, go do this, whatever.
yeah,
The impact your mother had on and you don't need to own your own business to do what she did,
yeah,
but like what
mhm,
deep impact she created in real people's lives
yeah,
by the person she was and doing something as small but as huge as that. Like, right, I
yeah.
feel like we stop ourselves so much as if like you got to dream big and like what is that, but like these small ways we can really be creating deep impact in people's lives.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, this was 30 years later that he said, "Can I please come? I want to pay respects to," he called her mama because, again, neighborhood mom. But I share that with you to really speak to kind of who I grew up with. Because when you ask the question, did I know kind of what I would turn into or some version of that? The answer is yes. I had a mother who taught me that I could do anything. And she believed that. And, if I drew something, it was fantastic. Now she wouldn't lie. She didn't bullshit. She wanted me to really explore every option. And I think partially because she couldn't, it was the socioeconomic situation she was in. It was being with my father at a stage where it was barely legal. Um, yeah, but I grew up with a mother who just deeply stood by me and taught me that I could be and do anything. And I remember when I was a teenager, I just didn't dress like everybody else. At one point, I thought it was the 1960s, and I would wear these fishnet bell bottoms and these big plastic earrings, which all sounds fine, except no one else was wearing this. Like, no one else in this neighborhood was wearing those kind of clothing, that kind of clothing. And I just remember her saying, "Don't ever change. Don't ever change. Don't ever feel like you have to be anyone else. Keep being yourself. Keep being yourself." And so that was sort of a mantra that I grew up with. And so she gave me permission to be me and to expect more of myself. And
Mm.
I think people from the outside may have expected of us, meaning of the folks that grew up in the community I grew up in. And the way that she treated others was the way that she treated her kids. She just had a certain standard and an expectation. And I think when you are raised with someone who has expectations, we often rise to meet them when done with love. Um, so we grew up. So I am biracial, Black, Jewish. My mom is Jewish. Um, and we grew up in a town that was very heavily Latino
Mm.
and more Black then than it is now. Now it's mostly Dominican. But at the time, I looked the way I looked, but I couldn't speak Spanish. And so that was weird. Where my brothers had kinkier hair, like my brothers looked more Black than I did. My hair was curly, I had freckles. So the way it works in my family is the younger you get, the sort of softer your hair gets and the lighter your skin gets. So it's just a weird genetics thing. It's what happened. So I was always expected to speak Spanish and didn't. And I sort of grew up feeling a little bit like an oddball because of that. Um, so I think by the time I made it, I went to school in New York City. I went to FIT, which is the Fashion Institute of Technology. And I often say that I grew up in New York City because of that, because I remember going to my high school reunion. I think it was my 10 or 15-year high school reunion, and no one even knew I had curly hair because I'd straightened my hair the entire up through high school. So everyone just
Wow.
assumed I always had straight hair. And it wasn't until I was 19 and at some point in FIT that I started to leave my hair because at the time you didn't see this kind of hair as often. Um, But it's really at that point that I feel like I started to fall into understanding who I was, at least having a better understanding of who I was. And because the city is so big and diverse, I never felt like I had to fit in anywhere. And even though I had a
Mm,
mother that always taught me that I didn't need to, I think it's very different when you are
mhm.
in an area where you really don't feel like you need to, where everyone looks and sounds differently and it's perfectly normal. That
Yeah.
wasn't where I came from. And so there was something really freeing and magical about that experience, which is why I will always say, like, it's, I grew up in New York.
I love that. And totally different, my own backstory and background. But I went to college I grew up in Cincinnati, Ohio, and was like, I mean, I'm white, but it was pretty much all white. I didn't even know
Mhm.
I didn't even know that being Jewish was a different religion. Like,
Right.
I
Right.
went to get
Also,
like,
it's also a culture, but yes.
yeah, right. Thank you. But
Yeah.
like, I just like knew like there was a Jewish bagel or Jewish deli we went to sometimes, whatever. But like, anyway, yeah, there was very little like color that I saw. There was like one or two black girls in my school. But anyway, regardless of that, when I moved to Chicago for liberal arts community, or yeah, not community college, uh, like, why am I forgetting? Anyway, a liberal arts college in downtown Chicago, and being in Chicago and also with like different people interested in arts and stuff too. Like, I realized the way I dressed, or like not like, I think that I was like, yeah, like taking off those layers of
Yeah.
the what should I this be dressing into, like wanting to fit in and stand out, that I felt in high school and like battled, and then being in a diverse city and around
Mm.
diverse people let me really play with that in different ways, from especially what I wore and what I did
Mhm.
with my hair, even, or different things. So it's different, but I remember feeling that too. So I'm guessing you went to FIT, so you were interested in fashion.
I did, yes.
Really?
So I had worked several jobs from the time I was 16. So the job that I held from 16 until I finally left was at Gap Kids, where I met one of my dearest friends who I'm still friends with today.
Love
But
it.
around the holidays, I would work two jobs. I remember being so excited to get a job. I was like, I can
Same.
earn my own money. And again, as I said, we grew up with no money, but I never felt a lack necessarily. But if I wanted fancy things, I'd have to buy them. Fancy meant the Gap. So I'd worked in retail, and I knew that I would go to school for fashion. I actually started out going to my community college for 2 years because we couldn't afford to send me to FIT
Well,
right
that's what
out of
I was also
school.
like, whoa, like that's kind of sounds like a school that would take a chunk of
Well,
change.
and the other thing was, even though I was only 30 miles away, I had to pay out of state tuition. So there was a fashion program at my community college. Apparently, that's not the way it is today, by the way, but it was then. So there was a fashion program. So I went to this fashion program at my community college for 2 years and then transferred to FIT. I ended up going back to FIT later for my master's degree in business, but I spent a whole career. I spent I say 15, but it's somewhere between 15 and 17 years in the fashion industry in New York City until I sort of imploded that when I was 35. But my whole career, like everything I'd ever known up until that point, was fashion. My internships were fashion. I went to FIT. I studied abroad in a fashion forecasting company. Like everything I did, I worked in fashion. It
And what
was
did you do?
all
Yeah,
I
what did you
known.
do in fashion and all those? I'm sure you did different roles, perhaps, but yeah, like,
No,
yeah, that's a
it's interesting.
long career in fashion.
It was interesting. I mean, when I was in college, I was a fit model, so I did a lot of fit modeling. But once I finished school, I'd been in product development my whole career for accessories. So I spent a long part of my career coach doing product development. So from the age of like 22, I'd gotten used to, or maybe 23 was my first trip to Asia, but I spent a lot of time on business flight trips around the world, working with, the artisans or the factories. And as I sort of moved around the fashion industry a little bit, it evolved from China and Korea to Italy. But I had a spectacular career in fashion doing product development. And it was really this sort of liaison between the design team and the actual people who were making the goods. So you had to be able to have some level of being able to speak both languages,
Mm.
you know and I think in many ways that was very transferable to everything that I did afterwards and still do today. It's the ability to situationally lead and have conversations with different people in different situations and scenarios and feel comfortable doing it. And I attribute a lot of that to the role that I had in the fashion industry for so long. And
Yeah.
truly, I don't think I could do what I do today if it were, even though it's completely different, if it weren't for the career that I had before. So I always like to remind folks that when you're pivoting, if you do something different, it doesn't mean that you let go of everything you did before. You have a career of skills that you've earned, you know.
I love that. And it's interesting because I was a live sound engineer as my first dream career and traveled all over the world doing that and loved it. And then, yeah, imploded my own life with the sudden loss of
Mhm.
my father's death, actually. Um, Created that. But so just yesterday, I was for the first time tying together my background in sound in like this deeply listening to the work that I have then created since then.
See, it always
Like,
circles back.
like I haven't even sorted it out enough in my mind right now, but like, whoa,
Yeah.
always being able to
Yeah.
really tune into those multiple layers and like weed out what is too noisy or doesn't matter, or
Yeah.
like what's, I don't know, interesting. So I love that you said that. And I get that. Yeah. Like being able to relate to the different people and like find this connectedness on you're
Yeah.
wanting this product or creating these items. And yeah, like how interesting of a skill you were developing that I don't like probably while you were doing it. I don't know if you realized maybe
No,
what
I
a
don't
skill
think I
that was or a gift like too.
No, I think it's just what I had to do. When you're meeting so many people from around the world. Mind you, I didn't get on a flight for the first time until I was 21. So to be getting on an international flight when I was 23 to fly straight across the world was like a bizarre experience. But it also, yeah, I don't think I ever realized what I was learning at the time, but I didn't feel like I had much of a choice, right? This was my job and I had to learn how to communicate and get things done in ways that would sort of benefit everyone involved. And so I learned how to be a bit of a chameleon in that way.
Yeah. So what happened that was like no more fashion?
Yeah, so it was spring 2013 Fashion Week. We were showing in the city, and I remember being in the office at 2 a.m. the night before the show, and the designer that I was working with at the time wanted a new pair of pants made. Which, fine, do what you want. It's 2 a.m., but this is what it is. And I remember everyone around me. At the time, there was style.com, which doesn't exist anymore, but it would drop all of the latest runway shows from New York Fashion Week. Kind of, I think it was live at the time. So there was this buzz in the studio at the time, and folks were really excited and they were watching every show in the midst of working on everything for our show the next day. And I just remember looking around and going, I don't give a shit. I don't care what anybody else is doing. I want to go home and go to sleep. But everyone else was on such a high for everything that was happening. And I just was not there. So it was sort of the first, I wouldn't say it was the first inkling, but it was definitely a moment that I think solidified that this isn't where I should be. I had done, and no one should, I do not recommend this unless you intend to implode your life. I ended up taking a yoga teacher training, yoga and meditation teacher training, and then I
I
did it
did that when
again.
I quit my life.
It's terrible. I mean, it's not actually terrible, but here's the thing. You go in thinking, I'm just going to learn the philosophy of this. I already have a job. And next thing you know, you're like, fuck all this. None of it matters. And that's what happened.
But
Um,
wait. So did you quit everything and then take the yoga and
no, no,
meditation
no.
teacher training? So got it.
So I had already
So
taken it.
I
This
I had
came,
quit first and then I was like, let me do this while I have
oh,
time off. But
no,
but
in
I
my case, I really think it was partially out of boredom, maybe because I did my first yoga teacher training before I went back to school, back to graduate school. And I think I was 29 then. And so I think I was just always seeking something, but didn't know what. So then I did the first yoga teacher training, like a 300 hour. Then I went to graduate school, and that kept me busy for 2 years. And then after that, I was like, I'm just going to go back and I'm going to do the like a 500 hour yoga teacher training. I think I was just seeking, but at the end of it, there was no not seeing what I had seen and what I'd come to know about myself. And there was a much deeper clarity of my own values. And I remember looking around the showroom that night and thinking, this ain't it. Just because I can doesn't mean I have to. And also, it wasn't going to get better than this. I was heading up product development for accessories at a luxury firm. I was flying to Italy and staying in vineyards and, meeting all these artisans. I mean, every shoe brand that you know of, we met with them and we worked with them, and it was spectacular. But I also was so clear. I'm like, it's not going to get any better. So if this ain't it, you got to go. And so I think I waited a few days because no one really works the day after the show. I mean, they're too busy waiting to see what the reviews are. I waited a few days, I think, and then I finally just handed over my notice and said, I'll stay for 2 more weeks, but I'm done. And I knew at the time that I had to commit internally to leaving the fashion industry. So I couldn't, if I left, I'd find another job. I had been good enough at what I did. I was very good at what I did, and I could find something else, but I had to internally commit. And so I did. Um, and I didn't know what I was going to do for that first year. Like, I really had no other plans. I did not have money to lean back on. I did have a 401k. But as I said, I took this yoga teacher training, and I remember teaching classes in my Brooklyn apartment, and there were like the same 6 people would come once a week, and we would do this hour-and-a-half long meditation and yoga, and I would make a pot of chai afterwards. Literally, these folks were like pushing the furniture around in my living room and then fixing it before they left, because it was my home, it was my apartment. And I think that even that, right, this sort of middle space, that whole next year was a real middle space of me having to figure out what I was going to do. And I did have some savings, so I knew I would be okay for a little while. But the ability to teach these intimate classes in my apartment, I think, again, unbeknownst to me at the time, really became a part of the teaching that I went on to do later.
What, first of all, so, okay.
Yeah.
And before you quit the fashion industry, had you
Yeah.
taught yoga? I mean, I know you had done all the trainings, but was it
No.
right? So I didn't think so. And so then you
I knew I
quit, you don't
could.
know, right? You quit, but you don't know what you're doing. What leads you then to say, hey, let me lead some yoga in my apartment? Like, a million bajillion people have yoga certifications now when
Yes,
we're
yes.
talking.
It was less so then, but yes.
Right, right. But still, but a million bajillion people have it now, and they are
Yeah.
not doing a damn thing with it. Maybe they don't want to. They don't want
Yeah,
to,
I
whatever.
didn't
But
want
same
to
thing.
either.
You didn't want to either, but they could
Yeah.
be, again, they might be in that middle space too. But like, what
Yeah.
made you be like, maybe I'll try to do this and in my apartment? Like,
Well, I had a lovely loft space. I knew I had the space for it, all things considered, relative to apartments in Brooklyn. I had the space for it, and I needed to be doing something. I couldn't just sit around and do nothing. There's only so many museums you can go to. Like, at some point, you're just like, Cyndie, you're at 35 and you don't have a fucking job. Like, you don't have a job. So I knew I had to really do something. And I think that was my way of just trying to busy myself. I knew that I could teach yoga. I mean, I knew that I was trained for it, and I don't think I'd ever actually, that is not true. You just reminded me that I went back to coach and taught yoga there. Like, it was corporate. I forgot about that. I went back and taught yoga. So when I gave my notice,
that
I was
must
like,
have been,
forgot.
was that like,
It
yeah.
was awesome. It was weird and awesome.
Yeah,
I
I was gonna
completely forgot. It was on the rooftop. Yes, I taught yoga at Coach. So I had taught yoga before. I mean, I don't know how great I was, though. I did end up getting a 2 private clients. You know what? I think I knew I was good. I must have known I was good enough to like teach it in my apartment, because as you're reminding me, I actually did teach
Well, and
yoga.
I don't even think I wasn't even asking about the fact of like hoping and knowing you're good enough to teach the yoga,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
the goal.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
And
I
like,
don't think,
who did you tell? Like, did you just invite your friends? Because also, too, I have found, and this can be true for me.
yeah.
So when I'm talking about other people, it's true for me and others, that many people too, we can be afraid to do the thing we want to do more around people we knew. Like, I would
Mhm.
feel more comfortable, like, hey, some strangers meet me in the park, but instead of like asking my friends,
Yeah.
like, like, so did you ask friends? Like, yeah, like that also, like, it's not
I
even about,
did. Yeah, it was friends of mine. Honestly, I knew that. So I had a pretty strong yoga practice at the time. I knew that some of my friends wanted to practice and wouldn't go to a studio. I don't think it ever crossed my mind that I shouldn't be comfortable with it. I felt like I had this knowledge and I could teach it, and it never felt like an about me thing.
got
It
it.
felt like it was teaching something that I'd learned, and I was always very transparent. Everybody there knew what I had done for a living and kind of my own background. I don't think it ever occurred to me to feel like it was anything out of the ordinary to do. I have the
Yeah.
skills to do it and I can. So I don't think it took much gall. It was just like, do you want to do this? And enough people said yes. And I thought, okay, then let's do this.
Awesome. And maybe that also has to come from how you were raised with like your mom putting that deep, belief in you that, yeah,
Maybe.
like, why not?
It's honestly, it just never, and I would say that that has stood true about a lot of things I've done. It didn't occur to me that I shouldn't do those things.
Or that
That I
that it's something that somebody else would question or be like, wow.
no,
Yeah.
no. I mean, why would they? It's yeah, no, it didn't occur to me. And I think a lot of times maybe I mean, I don't think I'm a naive person, but maybe it's a little bit of naivete where I just feel like, well, if I can, then why wouldn't I?
Yeah.
I don't feel like it took anything extra special out of me to do that. It was something I can do and I did, and it was fantastic.
And so what ended up evolving from, yeah, this middle year, I think you were referring to it.
Yeah, yeah,
And
this middle year of I don't know what I'm doing as a grown ass person. So and I believe this to be true almost all of the time. We are often called to make decisions, right? To just do something. We don't have to know exactly what it is, but we have to take action. And that taking action and teaching that class, I feel very much somehow led to one of my graduate school professors called me and said, I think you should be teaching at FIT.
Hmm.
He's like, you'd be amazing. Like you have so much to offer. I think you should be teaching. So again, I didn't know that I shouldn't be. It didn't occur to me that this was a special thing to be able to teach at FIT. And I was an excellent adjunct professor. And one of the folks that, when you teach at a college, you are then observed by other faculty. And one of the faculty members who observed me also taught at Parsons. And he eventually asked if I would come teach at Parsons, which is another design school in New York City. And so I did. I just kept sort of accepting the offers that came in. But I think that that tiny yoga class in my apartment really led to a certain confidence in speaking publicly and speaking
Mm.
aloud that by the time I started teaching at FIT, it felt very natural. More so by the time I started speaking at Parsons. And I remember that somebody from the yoga world, from the studio that I was going to at the time, had just left her job and wanted to start a fashion brand. And she reached out and asked if I would consult with her on it. And I said, of course, I'll consult with you on it. This is all I know. So I ended up probably 18 months after quitting the first part of my life, after quitting, starting something called the Collective of Us. And it was initially folks that were small business owners, particularly focused on the fashion industry. And I would just get them together. Again, I think back to what I did in my apartment with those yoga and meditation classes. We'd get these strangers together. We would, I would talk about my experience in the fashion industry. Everybody would be able to ask questions. They would be able to rely on one another. I feel like now you actually see this a lot more than you did then.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I started this thing called the Collective of Us, and it went on for 3 years, and it was great. And I think again, like so much of that started with me teaching this sort of silly yoga class. It wasn't silly, but I think it can feel like, well, where the hell did that come from? And it really did connect very much to what I ended up going on to do. And because I had then really built, I take the skills that I had learned in the fashion industry, which was these sort of connecting the dots and like understanding and communicating with folks that maybe didn't feel like they had anything in common with each other. So there was that piece of it. And then teaching that yoga class and teaching students at Parsons and FIT really allowed me to become more confident in my voice. So at some point, I remember teaching. Somebody asked me to talk about my background because at the time I only spoke about fashion. I had nothing else to talk about and sort of
Mm.
leaving the fashion industry. And somebody asked me to speak, and I had never spoken on a stage before that. And I swear I just came alive. I didn't stumble over my words. I was not uncomfortable at all. I was happy to ask questions. I mean, it was amazing. And again, I attribute it to these small steps that I took along the way. Like to this day, people will say, Cyndie, are you media trained? And I'm like, I don't even know what that means. I do now. I know what it means because a friend of mine is an on air personality. But I think it was really for me about taking these small steps that led to the next thing and being willing to accept the next thing, whether I was fully prepared or not. And so after speaking at that one conference, I was invited a lot more to speak at other conferences. And eventually they got bigger and bigger and bigger until right up until the pandemic, where that was the primary part of my business. And I made a lot of money doing it. And it was awesome. And I love it. And I still love it.
And what were you primarily speaking about? Was it still involved in fashion?
No, no, no,
Okay.
no. At that point, it had all
I didn't
transitioned.
think so, but I wasn't sure where it went.
Yeah, it was much of it was about our voice, like confidence in using our voice, and kind of it it really relied very much on what I had been learning over the past 2 years. And I say this to people who want to speak. I say, teach what you know. You know, you're only an expert in your lived experience. You're not expected to know everything, but teach what you know. And I did a workshop. There was one session, a keynote that I would do on confidence, another one that I would do with on, and I still do this one, understanding your voice and your vibe in the workplace. There was another one on collaboration that I still do as well, which is teaching folks how to collaborate using many of my own lived experiences within this. And the one that I mean, I still speak, but the one I did right before the pandemic shut down was for 3,000 people in Las Vegas, and it was awesome. And none of this was anything that I could have foreseen when I was moving to New York for the first time and, allowing my hair to go natural.
Yeah, amazing. And I love hearing all the steps that it did naturally evolve into, like
Mm.
all the pieces coming together. I love that. So, where did writing books come from? Because your now second book
Yeah.
is,
Yes.
I believe when this is coming out, it's like coming out that same week. So, so
Yes.
Microjoys is the new one, Finding Hope, especially when life is not okay. But that's not your first one.
No. So the
So,
first book came out in 2018. So again, think back to what I just said a few minutes ago, how one step led to the next, and I just kept saying yes. So I was delivering a talk in New York City, and somebody from a publisher was there. And they reached out I know this all sounds ridiculous, the likelihood of this happening, but this is what happened. Somebody from a publisher was there. She reached out. Actually, she was also biracial Black. And when Black people are in a room, they will find each other and they will connect with each other and they will keep connecting with each other. We ended up going out for drinks. She lived in Brooklyn as well. We ended up going out for drinks and she said, "Hey, do you want to write a book about this?" And it was, oh, and somewhere in between, I was certified in positive psychology. I forgot about that. Um, but she's like, "Oh, would you want to write a book about this from sort of a layperson's perspective?" And I was like, "Yeah, sure. I mean, why not?" And I had 7 weeks to write the book. And
seven
so I
weeks.
did 7 weeks. The book came out before the holiday season of 2018, and it has sold hundreds of thousands of copies. It's called A Year of Positive Thinking, and it is, I mean, I will always, I'm sure, get messages from folks just saying this book has changed my life. This is the third year that I'm going through it. You just don't know the impact of what you put into the world. It was not rocket science, that book.
I'm like stuck, like I'm still like 7 weeks.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
Like my first book came out last year too. I was like, definitely not take 7 weeks. But
No,
seven
not
weeks,
Microjoys either. This was very
but
different.
also is the 7 weeks including the time to figure out what is it? So that person must have said, "Do you want to write a book about this?" And it was a talk about positivity or so, or was it,
Positive thinking.
So it was like, okay, yeah, write a book about positive thinking. How long did it take you to get to the idea for a year and like the format of it?
She and I worked together on it, and it was pretty much in the contract when I signed it.
Got it. And so, and what is the format? Is it like, yeah, you
So
pick this
it's
book up and you're starting with a year of like
You're
whatever.
starting
So if
with
I,
January 1. There's
oh,
January 1. It's literally 365 days. It is quotes, it's excerpts, it is sayings from me. It's 365 ways of thinking more positively. So,
but it's like there's dates for each page. So I
oh
would
yeah,
like, oh,
yeah.
if you buy it right now, you could turn to February, whatever the date is,
Yeah.
and see what your message is
Correct.
for that day.
Yeah. So
Very
everything, there's
cool.
no year in it, but which is why people will literally every year around the new year, I know I'm going to get tagged a lot in a year of positive thinking because folks just keep doing it over and over. And it's not an exercise book so much as like a thought.
I love it.
something for you to ponder
A
and
little
so
nugget.
a little nugget. That's all it is. And it's very gifty and it's very cute. And a lot of folks have purchased that book. And then 2020 happened, and everything sort of fell apart. My nephew was murdered on May 29th, 2020. It was the same week that George Floyd was killed in the US that sort of kicked off the global stage for Black Lives Matter. Um, and that was just shocking. That does not happen to you until it does. Having somebody murdered in your family is something that happens in true crime. It's something that happens on TV. It doesn't happen to you until it does. And I remember after my nephew was killed, and I talked about it for a little while, and I remember I have very firm boundaries, and I think I always have. I remember thinking, I'm no longer willing to talk about him in public
Mm.
in this way because it was important to me. It was important to me to separate what was happening on the inside with what I was sharing in the public. And it's very easy for people to want to, it's trauma porn. People are it's sort of like watching a train wreck. We're all so curious. I don't think it makes people bad, but we're all deeply curious. And I remember just feeling like, okay, that's it. I'm not going to talk about him publicly anymore. Um, oh, by the way, here's a picture of him when he was in kindergarten. That's my nephew and I.
Oh.
It was so cute. Um, and so I started talking about these microjoys because what was true for me at the
Mm.
time was everything that I talked about in a year of positive thinking, I couldn't do it. I couldn't do it. I didn't know that sort of grief. And I have always been an optimist. Um, but I couldn't reach for anything at that point. And it really became like, what is in front of me right now? What is in front of me right now? Just to break these moments of grieving and sorrow. And, what ended up happening very shortly after, 4 months later, my mom passed away unexpectedly. So it just became one thing after the next, after the next. And as an optimist, I needed something, but the idea of thinking positively was not going to cut it. It just wasn't going to cut it. Not because anything in a year of positive thinking isn't true. Um, it will always be true, but it's a matter of where I was in my own life. And I couldn't think positively. And what I eventually went on to realize was that I didn't want to find a silver lining and losing some of the most important people in my life. After that, my brother went into cardiac arrest and spent 2.5 months in the ICU. I was diagnosed with breast cancer. Like it just life kept coming. And I remember thinking, like, I am absolutely not going to try and trivialize these losses or find a silver lining. Like, no, I'm not glad that my mom's out of pain. Like, there's stuff like that I think
Right.
people say and they think I
But
don't
at
know what the
least
hell
she's at
people think.
peace
At least
now.
she's at peace. I'm like, no, I'd like her here on like calling me and harassing me the way she always did. Like that's just
They're not suffering anymore.
yeah, those sort of things, those pithy things that somebody somewhere taught us to say to grieving people. We at some point I'll write a book to say these are the things you'd never do to grieving people. But that's in the future.
It's
Back to
needed. It's
Microjoys.
needed. Go like
Back
please
to
go forth.
Microjoys. Um, so I just remember sort of, and this really I think just came from my being an optimist. Like I needed something to break those moments. I needed these moments of respite. So I would go through a photo album, and find pictures of my mom or my nephew, or I'd scroll through images from my phone and I might see a flower that was somehow blooming in the middle of a snowstorm. Like just these somewhat ordinary things that were within reach. I couldn't reach for anything. I couldn't pull anything out of anywhere. But I could see the things that were in front of me. And so it ended up becoming maybe 2.5 years. I'm really just coming out of it, of reframing my own way of accessing joy. And so when I describe Microjoys, which is the name of the book, it's honing the ability to access joy despite all else. So what it is it's really about how do we hold joy in one hand and grief in the other at the exact same time. And I think that sometimes positive psychology can get misconstrued to be toxic positivity, this sort of good vibes only mentality that doesn't leave any space for bad vibes, for people dying, for being in a, quarantined for 2 years, for it doesn't leave space for that. And I remember these moments of feeling ashamed because I had written this best-selling book about this topic and I couldn't do it. So it had the opposite effect. And I think that so much of the positivity that we see, and I was a part of it too. So this is not pointing the finger at other people. I think it's just an evolution in who I am and my own lived experience where I understand how problematic that can be because I felt shame about it and I didn't know what to do if I couldn't feel good,
Mm.
you know? Um, and so Microjoys really became about allowing myself to sit with everything that was really difficult at length. And then also offering myself the respite of looking for these things that would bring me joy, very consciously looking for them, taking pictures of things, documenting them, going back through documents, sitting for 5 minutes and just looking at the room that I was in at the time. So that was a long, windy way to tell you how Microjoys came to be.
No, I love it. And the way that you speak of it is so well worded and makes so much sense because I have been trying to share similar message for years and same thing. And a lot of my messages in the past were definitely maybe leaned a little bit more on the toxic positivity
Same.
side as well. And I'm like, yeah, like I even have an affirmation deck and I now read some of them like, okay.
Questionable. Yeah.
Okay. But like can see, but also to some person, they're like, yes, still.
You
Like,
nailed
so
it.
it's like,
And
it's not like,
it's not bad.
I didn't put evil out into the world.
Yes.
It's not, but like, yes.
Yeah.
But no, and yeah, you worded it so well because that's, and which by the way, reading your, I don't know if it's the intro or whatever, the very first thing in your book,
The preface.
all the loss, yes, which you then said there, but reading it so closely in that book, I'm someone who doesn't like, I'm very great at not just hearing and like understanding a whole space and not taking on like it like that. I was like, Jesus, like crying at
Mm.
all of that loss. It's just compounded. Anyway, the work that I went when I gave up my career of sound that I loved and that
Yeah.
had whatever was from my dad passing away suddenly. And that was one loss.
Yeah.
And yeah, he was 57 at the time and young, and it was an accident and a surprise, but it wasn't murder. It was an
Right.
accident, but yeah, like really shook me up. But from there is like totally changed the path of my life. And so going there was also seeing like I worked for people that had it all. Like I
Yeah.
was living my dream, and then I was like working for Grammy Award winning artists that were really had it all and really living
Yeah.
their dream life, and still seeing how much the human condition of pain and suffering and what should I do next in this. And so people living their biggest dreams, and what's the point because you're not enjoying it.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
so like
Mm-hmm.
still chasing that worthiness, enoughness, success, feeling of fulfillment. I'm stumbling
Yes.
all over my words today.
That's okay. I
Yeah.
like assessment. I like that word. It should be a word.
I'm making
Can
up
be.
new words left and right over here. But seeing like, yeah, we're so often like chasing it, but so like how can we have access to those own things? Or like, yeah, life isn't fair. Terrible things happen every day. We
Full
don't know
stop.
what's going to
Life isn't
happen.
fair. Full stop.
Life
Right?
isn't fair.
Yeah.
And so it isn't like, well, then give up, but like, yeah, how can you make some space for some joy today? Like,
Yeah.
how can you connect with your own feelings of fulfillment? It's not like out there, once I do the thing, once I have this credit, once I check off
Yeah.
all the items on my to-do list. So I've also moved into like joy and fulfillment. But yeah, it's an interesting thing to like talk about. And like, okay, yes, you've just
100%.
watched this massacre in the world, but like, go find some joy for you today.
That's it. That's it. It's like, you do you, sister. And I'm like, do what? Have you not seen what's happening in the world? What do you want me to do right now?
But yeah, like figuring out that like, and that's what I think this book is going to be is going to be so huge. But even just again, like how you're saying it, even just putting it as micro joys, I
Yeah.
think just even adding that word helps to your brain to understand it's okay
Yeah.
to allow
Yeah.
myself to find a glimmer of
Mhm.
joy. Well, yes, this pain exists, this grief exists, this unfairness exists to me and to others. So that, and because it's like, how are we going to continue showing up or trying to make a
That's it.
difference or spreading the kindness that your mother did, that made a huge impact if you're not like having that tap, that even the tiniest access
Yeah.
to that joy.
And I think you really did a beautiful job of explaining it, right? It's like we can't do anything worthwhile in the world if we can't hold both of those things, not for very long anyway. It's not sustainable. So I remember saying in the book, like, this is a more sustainable way of experiencing joy for me. Um, because if I was constantly dishing it out and not taking it in, I couldn't experience joy. If I were pushing away all of the negative things or the perceived bad things that happened, I would not be able to feel the full sort of spectrum of human emotions. And, very few things in life are absolute. We're often holding multiple truths at one time.
Always. How
And
can we never
always,
like when is when are we not?
right. But and I think over the last few years, it's really come under a microscope how much we are having to hold as humans at one time. Everything happening in the world, all of the folks who died during the pandemic from COVID, not including everyone else. And by the way, all of the losses that I experienced, none of them were COVID related. It just happened to be during a pandemic. But I think more than ever, we really need to be able to hold both things because we don't want to be a hermit under a rock and it's like, la, 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 la. I don't want to know what's going on in the world. You want to know what's going on in the world because you want to impact change where you can, but not at the expense of yourself. Because if you are not able to hold your own joy and create healthy boundaries, then you can't do for others. And so I hope that this book opens up this conversation in a very different way that helps to move us away from toxic positivity. And the other thing I just want to add is that's not about blaming people who a quote helps. There's a reason that people keep coming back to me every year and saying, Microjoys has changed my life, because sometimes that's
Or you
exactly what we
mean
need.
your
A year of
positive
positive
thinking?
thinking.
Yeah.
Sorry, I was forward thinking with Microjoys,
Yes,
but
that
a
is going to
year,
be happening in the
it
next
will
coming
be
years.
happening. Nobody, a year of positive thinking because people start again on January 1. And sometimes that is what we need. Sometimes, to your point, it's not about a scale of like, this is good positivity and this is bad positivity. It's an evolution. It's like, what do you need in this moment? If you need, a sort of quote of the day to help you get there, then rock on. There's nothing wrong with that. It's just where we are at any particular moment. So there's no good
Yeah.
or bad. It's just where we are on the spectrum.
Totally. And while you said that, it made me think of like one of my I don't really like the everything happens for a reason things, but
Sure.
sometimes, yeah, that actually like
Helps.
whatever. Maybe I was late because I missed that car accident. Everything happens for a reason, but like,
Yeah.
oh, someone whatever passed away or something like, or yeah, like for a lot of times I'm like, I go with like it's happening. Like that's
Yeah.
my sort of thing. It's like, okay, this is what's happening.
Yeah.
And it makes me
Yeah.
face like, okay, so this is what's happening. So how am I going to move through it? How am I going to handle it? How like
Yeah.
whatever. And don't go into denial and la 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 only
Yeah.
joy.
Yeah.
But also like this is what's happening. But and speaking to that too, don't you feel that because yeah, you mentioned too the like going, hiding from the things and only that. Don't you feel that as someone who allows yourself to feel all the things and the joy, that it's our potential, like the joy and awe and wonder that I feel now because I allow myself that this sucks, this is hard, all of that. I feel it's even more deeply. It's so much more beautiful. Like I'm getting emotional right now, like because I see the bush in my yard in the sunshine, right? Like I feel because I allow that space for all of that, then the joy and likely these micro joy things, again, like they mean so much more.
Yeah. There's an acuteness of feeling, right? We feel things more deeply. And I think that that's something I've really learned over the past few years of inadvertently honing this mindset of microjoys is that when we allow ourselves to sit deeply in whatever we are going through, which includes the difficult things, the tragic things, the sad things, it allows us to feel everything more acutely. So when these moments happen, like the bush, that you just talked about, or the light streaming through the window, we notice it. And I can only speak for myself, and this book is really essays from my own lived experience, but I believe that when we allow ourselves to feel all of it, we appreciate the beauty that already exists as well. Again, there's like an acuteness that comes with our feelings from having experienced all things and accepted all things.
Love that. And speaking of, yeah, that's what I was going to say. I wanted to mention that the framework of the book is like the short essays, like personal stories from your life, which I love that. And I think can be a great way for people. Like, how many people buy a book but then not read it because it
Yeah.
seems like too overwhelming?
Yeah.
Right. And so it's
Yeah.
very
Yeah.
easily readable and like open to the pages. And by the way, the kitten story,
About Jake.
is that the cat from
His
the
name's Jake. Yeah.
book?
The little girl that was checking me out. And I
Hilarious,
was like, I'm leaving with the cat. I don't know what to tell you. I'm
cracked
taking the
me
cat.
up, and then tried to give it away.
Yeah. Nobody would take him. No one would take Jake.
And ended up being great, great
My
microjoy
my
addiction.
cat companion. This is true. But I sort of hope that what Microjoys offers is the nuance in how we access joy.
Mhm.
It's not good vibes only, right? It's saying like these are many, many ways that you can access joy, and there is a nuance to it. Even as you talk about the bush, I think you say that in front of the wrong person and they roll their eyes and they're like, a bush, give me a break. But the truth of the matter is, right, is we allow ourselves to feel beauty differently and to see it and to appreciate and to be present in it differently when we've allowed ourselves to feel the depth of sadness as well.
Absolutely. I was about to say amen, and I never say amen, so that was weird for me.
It's probably my headscarf
As a
inspired by
recovering Catholic,
amen.
no. Okay, I'm gonna get into the questions that I ask everyone. Like, I feel like I would talk to you forever. Oh, this first question feels funny for me. What is a go-to to raise your joy levels?
Microjoys.
But that's like, yeah. So, what are some of your like micro joys? Like a
Uh,
go-to?
Speaking to strangers. When I don't feel great, I will go for a walk and chat up strangers because there's a certain leveling of the scales that happens when you're around other people. I work alone, I work from home. It's very easy to get into my head. And the second that I step out, and I will go buy a coffee, even if I don't want the coffee, because I can talk to the barista. And that is what my life has turned into. But
I do
truly,
that.
speaking to strangers, it's like it is so worth this $5 cup of coffee to break my own spell, of where my brain is going. So that's an easy
I do
one.
that too. And I do not like running errands, but I
Yes.
will like go run an errand, like being with other humans and that I don't know. And like, yeah, like talking to the checkout person or yeah, walking to
Yeah.
get a coffee and like that human interaction,
Yeah.
like totally changes everything for me.
Even when it's brief, so that's one. Not fearing your emotions is another one, like really being able to sit with the all things of what we feel, embracing spontaneity, right? So if I don't know, there's a museum exhibition going on around the corner, there's a local art museum, and I get an email in my inbox that says it's tonight, I'm like, okay, I'll go. Like doing more of that, doing more of, I mean, it's really easy to talk ourselves out of doing things. And sometimes that embracing spontaneity, which I also consider to be a micro joy, is saying, shit, I'm going to go to this thing tonight, even though that was not what I woke up thinking that's what I
Yeah.
was going to do. So that's another way. Um, I actually have a list. So I'm looking here because no shit, I just want to not bullshit you. Um, this is a good one. Choosing an ordinary place to visit. The list, by the way, is all from the book. It's just my own way of having it all in front of me. Choosing an ordinary place to visit and really allowing yourself to be present. So in the book, there is a spice shop, is what the essay is called. It might be one of the first few essays, but it talks about this local spice shop in my neighborhood in Brooklyn, and it's been there for over 100 years. It's very, very old, and allowing myself to go in there and hear all of the sounds, smell all of the smells. Like they have, a bulk section, there's a cheesemonger, there's somebody who has Lebanese foods.
I'm like, I'm gonna go
Um,
here.
there's coffee, there's tea, there's someone else who makes breads, but it was really allowing myself to walk into this shop and experience all of it. right? I think about how many times I'd walked in and out of there and just picked up the things. I got my number for my nuts. I got my nuts and I walked out. It's a
Mm.
very different experience when you allow yourself to use your five senses to experience someplace. And because I was really at the time learning this sort of idea of microjoys, it didn't occur to me what was happening until later when I thought back about it. And I thought, wow, I can write in such detail about it because I was so present and aware in ways that I normally am not. So even, I mean, look, it doesn't have to be a spice shop in Brooklyn. It could be your Whole Foods or your Trader Joe's or whatever it is. It's take note of what you see, what you smell, what you can touch, the languages you hear, the people that are speaking. And, I've been asked about the level of detail in this book, and I attribute a lot of that to allowing myself to be present in spaces and also documenting everything, which is coincidentally another way to access joy. Take pictures of the everyday, write the everyday, share stories of the everyday, because when you need to access joy, you have it at your fingertips. Of course, it's not the joy, but when I look at a picture, for example, it will bring me back to that moment, and it pulls me out of whatever difficulty I may be going through in that instance.
Love that so much. And the idea of, yeah, going to an ordinary place, but like taking it in a whole different way, really being present with everything. Okay, the next question I ask everybody is, what is easiest for you is not always what is best for you. Can you think of a way to apply that to yourself? So what is easiest for me is blank. What is best for me is blank.
Yeah, I mean the obvious, right? What is easiest for me is to just not want to do anything that involves physical anything. But what is best is that I just get the mat out and practice yoga.
Yeah.
It's not easiest. I really don't want to do it most of the time, but it is what's best for me mentally and physically.
That's why I live by the mantra of any minutes is more than no minutes.
There
Like,
you
so then I'm like,
go.
okay, any minutes of yoga or I'll go on any minutes walk. Cause yeah, it's
That's
like, oh,
right.
I
Any
don't have the
minutes.
time, or I'm too tired of this. Any
Yes.
minutes. And then usually you're motivated to do more than
That's right. Because once you're out there, you're not going to stop, right?
yeah. Yeah. Or sometimes if you really do have a time crunch or whatever, then like, wow, I still feel the impact
Yeah.
of that 3 minutes of stretching
I love
or that
any
whatever.
minutes. Any
Yeah. That's
minutes. That's pretty solid.
any
Hashtag
minutes is
any
more than no
minutes.
minutes. Yeah. Okay. The last question is, the name of the podcast is Claim It, which refers to how I was talking about earlier, how it felt like everybody was chasing like enoughness, fulfillment, success from outside of themselves. And I feel like we're so often trained to do that based on how we think that will look or should look. And so then we really aren't connected to how would that feel? How would it feel? And so when you look at things based on how would it feel, you can actually have access to claiming it, or a glimpse of it in that moment.
Mm-hmm.
So what are you claiming for yourself right now?
Joy. I'm claiming joy and this newfound new version of joy for myself, which is much more accessible and much more sustainable. So that's what I'm claiming.
Love it. Thank you so much. I love talking to you so much. And I know that this book, Microjoys, is going to really create an impact in the world. So thank you for taking all of your pain and your grief and your lived experiences and doing this for yourself and then putting it into this amazing project.
And also sharing my joy.
Yes. Yes. So
So
yes,
I thank you
taking
for
all of that
having
to
me.
access your joy and to then turn it into this.
Well, thank you for having me. Thank you for having me. Really, it's been a treat.
You're so welcome. Wait, did I don't know how to do when I'm like, I
You're
meant to just
recording.
stop.
You
I
just
meant
get
to
to stop
stop.
recording.
I'm like, exactly. I'm like, I don't